Jerri Ward, back with I Object, Justice Examined. And I've got a very serious topic to discuss with everyone today. As everyone out there knows, religious rights in this country have been under attack. What the government officials are doing and others are doing, those who advocate this so-called wall between religion and the public square or government, what they've been advocating is chasing religion out of the public square and into the homes and churches. In other words, they want people to be unable to practice their religion out in public, but rather to confine their religious beliefs to their homes and to their churches. They don't want them bringing their religious values and beliefs to work, to bear to work. In other words, they don't want Christians to be able to live under the sovereignty of God as Christians in the public square. What people might not know, though, is that not only are they chasing them out of the public square, a lot of these people are chasing them directly into the homes of religious Christians and others. And what I'm specifically talking about are government efforts to interfere with the rights of parents to homeschool their children so that their children can receive a proper religious basis and religious training in their schooling. And I've got a guest who is very knowledgeable about that and, in fact, has been on the forefront of fighting for parents' rights in that very area. I'm going to be interviewing Tim Lambert, the president and executive director of the Texas Homeschool Coalition. And Mr. Lambert has been involved with the homeschool leadership in Texas for 20 years, and he and his wife actually homeschooled their 4 children for 16 years, and they graduated the last 2 of those children in 2000. Tim publishes the Texas Homeschool Coalition Review magazine, which is now in its 12th year and reaches over 60,000 homeschoolers and others on a quarterly basis. He's been the head of the state homeschool organization for the leading homeschool state, which is Texas, in this country since 1990. He's a recognized authority on homeschool issues. He's testified in court over those issues. He's also testified before numerous Texas legislative committees on issues related to homeschooling, and he deals with government agencies on that basis. He also addresses conferences such as the Texas Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers on the topic. He served 8 years as a Republican National Committee man for Texas. And one of the issues that he has dealt directly with is the use of child protective services to invade homeschoolers' homes, threatening to take those children and sometimes actually taking those children because parents choose to homeschool. Mr. Lambert, welcome to my show.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I'm glad to be with you.
May I call you Tim on the air?
You certainly may.
All right. Well, Tim, what I would like for you to first start with is explain why parents choose to homeschool.
Jerry, parents choose to homeschool for a lot of reasons, but probably the largest group of people choose to homeschool because they want to pass on their religious values in a way that is integrated with their education of their children. And that's generally not possible today in a public school setting. So many people decide we're going to homeschool and give our kids not only academic training, but we'll integrate our religious values in the process of doing so.
And has that made homeschoolers a target for government meddling?
I'm not sure the religious aspect of that has, but we've in Texas we have had a struggle against the state since the early 80s. When the then Attorney General Jim Maddox said he didn't believe parents were qualified to raise their kids, much less teach them at home, and the state was actively prosecuting people for homeschooling. We won that. We settled that by an action against the state called the Leeper versus Arlington ISD case. So today we continue to see a more limited battle on the front with school superintendents who generally want to argue that you have to get our permission or you have to come to our school to register or some of those kinds of things. But, Jerry, as you mentioned, more disturbingly, we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years people who are using CPS as a weapon against homeschool families.
Well, let me say the reason I asked you the question about whether the religious component is involved is that all education is religious. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that, and I believe that the presuppositional base for every educational model has some religious basis. Whether you're a secular public school, some people would refer to the secular humanism as the religious foundation for that, or whether you're a Christian, you happen to be a Catholic or a Baptist or some other ones, we all have a religious presupposition as a basis of our education.
Well, the way I see it is that we are at a crossroads in determining the question in our country as to whether the state has sovereignty over your children or God has sovereignty over your children and parents are the stewards of their children. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that, and that was the basis of our argument 25 years ago when we were fighting with the state over the fact that we believe that we as parents, under God's authority and responsibility, had the right to direct the education and upbringing of our children.
Well, and that's why I believe personally that there is a religious component, even though it's unspoken, because I believe that the state wants to control and mold children in their own secular religion to be little cogs in their society, as opposed to letting people, our parents, utilize their own conscience, their own religious principles and values in order to mold their children to be good Christians, good Orthodox Jews, good Muslims, that sort of thing. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, and I think, Jerry, where we see this is in the attitudes or the worldviews of the people that the government uses to enforce these, and particularly CPS workers. And I know that you and I have been following the FLDS fiasco in Tom Green County in San Angelo, and the state there continues to argue that they are not going after these people for their religion. And yet I believe if you look at the facts of that case, it's very clear that these people are being prosecuted and persecuted because of what they believe and what they teach.
Well, they can repeat that mantra that this is not about religion at all, but what happens when CPS actually gets some kind of jurisdiction over these kids is then they control different aspects of their life, like the educational aspect, utilizing psychological exams. Why don't you explain exactly how intrusive CPS can be with parents who choose to opt out of the secular lifestyle in order to protect their kids from all the many degenerate influences we have in the secular society, how they try to impact and intrude into those parents' world? You
know, Jerry, the scary thing is that as a criminal, you have more rights in terms of there has to be evidence and before they can prosecute you and file charges against you. A criminal has more rights than a parent does in a CPS investigation. It is not uncommon at all for a homeschool family to be an anonymous allegation to be made by a public school official who disagrees with their decision to homeschool, or a former spouse in a custody situation, or a neighbor who is angry for some reason or another. And when that allegation is made, the state requires by statute that every such allegation be investigated. And then, of course, when a CPS worker comes to the door, in fact, we had a call this morning, Jerry, where a homeschool family had a CPS worker. In fact, they had a deputy sheriff come to their door at 10 o'clock at night and say, we've had an allegation, I'd like to come in, and the father declined. My kids are in bed and that sort of thing. And a week later, a CPS worker came, and they said, we want to discuss these allegations. And they refused to tell the parents what the allegations were.
You're kidding.
No, and their argument, and see, this is very different, Jerry. As the governor appointed me to the Parental Advisory Committee for CPS, and CPS acknowledges that the law does require them to tell the parent what the allegation is, but generally they don't do that until after they have interviewed the children. If a child is in a public school or a traditional private school, CPS has full authority to go to that school, interview that child, remove that child from the school, disrobe or examine the child, all without the knowledge or consent of the parent.
What do you mean they have full authority? Are you saying there's a statute that gives them this authority?
Yes. So there's statute and or rule that allows them to do that. And so usually when they go to the parent, they have already interviewed that child in a home school, so they don't mind telling you what the allegation is. In a home school setting, they have not had access to your child because your child is in your home, and you don't have to waive your Fourth Amendment right to unreasonable searches and seizures. So very often these caseworkers do not want to tell you what the allegation is because they have not yet interviewed your children. And so if you decide as a homeschool parent that you will stand on your Fourth Amendment right and you will say, well, I don't believe I want to let you into my home or have access to my children until I know what the allegations are, then you get accused of being uncooperative. That's something we've heard a whole lot in relationship to this FLDS thing. They've accused these parents and people of being uncooperative, which in my experience, Jerry, generally means you won't roll over and waive your rights and give us whatever we want.
Well, it sounds like there's some other parallels between the call you got last night and what happened out on that ranch, because they got out on that ranch at 9 o'clock at night and forced children from their beds to interview them on the same kind of fishing expedition.
Well, and the difference, Jerry, is in the situation at FLDS that it was instigated by what we now know to be a false and I think malicious phone call that gave the CPS workers the grounds to get a court order. And that is not uncommon at all. We see very often not only the anonymous allegation, but if a family stands and says, I don't want to let you in, very often these judges that work with these CPS workers have what I would consider a very unhealthy relationship in which the judge will very often give them whatever they ask for without evidence.
Well,
the statute.
Let's parse this out. What you're saying is, rather than the judiciary acting as a check on these CPS workers, which is the model, they're actually co-opted by CPS and rubber stamp whatever they want. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. They are facilitating these sorts of things. These people have a relationship with them, and if they say, Judge, these people won't let us in, and they give them almost anything, and we saw that at the FLDS thing in these later situations, the judge allowed these things to happen with virtually no evidence. And so what happens in a family situation then is if you say, well, I don't want to waive my right, and they go to a judge who says, okay, and in fact, Jerry, I had a family, the father was an attorney, a homeschool dad. Father was an attorney. They had about 5 or 6 kids. They were in a family outing on a holiday, and they had 2 cars. And when they left, both of them thought they had, half the kids, and one of the children was left. And when they got home, they realized the situation and went back immediately and got the child. CPS came in, had to investigate. The parents met with the CPS worker on their front porch. They had the children there. He was able to observe. They explained everything. And the CPS worker said, well, that's fine, but I have to interview these children alone, individually. And
do they have a right to do that?
Well, the policy is that they do. I mean, that is CPS policy. And unfortunately, Jerry, that policy is that they can then go on a fishing trip with these children, ask all sorts of questions. And if you're Jerry, dealing with a conservative Christian family who's taken great pains to keep their children from being exposed to some of the harsher, darker sides of our culture, it can be a traumatizing situation for that child to have to answer some of these questions that CPS asks.
Well, that's what I've heard about some of the girls of the FLDS who didn't even know what sex was. when they were questioned about that by the CPS workers in this particular case. And I think it's really important that we make a distinction between the Constitution and statutes enacted by our legislature and policy and procedures enacted by CPS, because what I'm hearing from you is they make up a bunch of their own stuff, and I guess a lot of it's regulation. Is it even regulation that goes through a comment period, or is it just internal policies that are driving a lot of these things that on their face seem to violate constitutional rights all over the place?
I believe they are policy adopted by the agency, basically to implement statute.
Okay, so it's the regulations that people can make comments on. So essentially here we have another bureaucracy that, in order to implement statutes, comes up with its own regulations, and these are unelected people. They put them out there for comment in the Texas Register. They get comments back, which they can ignore, and then they pass them, and then the courts give them carte blanche to enforce and interpret their own rules. Is that the situation you've been seeing?
Yes.
Okay.
And so you have caseworkers. In fact, Jerry, one of the things that we were successful in getting adopted by the legislature in 2005 when they expanded CPS was a requirement that these CPS caseworkers have training on the Fourth Amendment, that families and citizens have a right to against unreasonable searches and seizures. And Jerry, what we found I found as a member of the Parental Advisory Committee is that I would say graciously that has been given a lick and a promise in terms of that training being disseminated to all of these caseworkers. So many of these caseworkers really don't understand these constitutional rights.
Well, I'm kind of afraid of them training their own workers on constitutional law, because I can imagine what kind of spin they would put on it. Is it the internal people that are allowed to give this training, or is an outside entity supposed to conduct it?
I'm not sure, Jerry. I'm not sure what the requirement is there, but I know that in some of these situations that I brought to the attention of the agency as a member of that committee, that they acknowledged they needed to do a better job, quote unquote, of getting this training to some of these people. So some of these caseworkers, the situation I was explaining with the father there, this father happened to be an attorney, and he worked with the local district attorney. So when CPS went to them and said, "We want you to force this guy to give his children to us to allow them to interview," the DA declined, and the CPS attorneys had agreed that they would not have any kind of ex parte hearing without, notifying their legal counsel, and yet they did exactly that. They went to what's called a cluster court and got another judge to give them a court
an order.
Right.
And they did this despite the DA's advice to them. Did they do you know if they told the judge what the DA had advised them?
I do not. We contacted the commissioner, and he made a phone call. All of a sudden, they decided, well, maybe we'll let the DA's office take care of this. So they reversed themselves. So
the checks and balances just don't stop these people, is what I'm hearing.
That's been our experience.
Well, it sounds like we need to get some judges in this state that have some backbone and will follow the law. Tim, stay over. We're going to be right back. We're up on a hard break. So we'll be back to talk to Tim Lambert, the President and Executive Director of the Texas Homeschool Coalition, right after the break. So stay tuned.